In 2019, 352 people died on our roads. What would be a more acceptable number?
Acceptable? 70 maybe?
Actually, this is what 70 people looks like.
It's my family.
So now what do you think would be a more acceptable number?
0. 0.
Welcome. My name's Bernard Carlon. I'm the Chief of the Centre for Road Safety at Transport for New South Wales. I'm coming to you from Sydney. Sorry that I can't be there in person, but we've had a significant increase in our road trauma here in New South Wales this year, and I'm really required here. I'd like to start by recognising I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge the connection of Aboriginal people to the land and waterways of New South Wales. And also note that in New South Wales, our Aboriginal community is overrepresented in our road toll, and we're making every effort to work with community to actually bring down the trauma that's affecting them. I wanted to start by giving a bit of context. So you may not all know about New South Wales, many of you would know about Sydney, but just so you get a context for where we are in terms of road trauma at a national and international perspective. In New South Wales, we've made great strides since our high of road trauma in 1978 of 1,384 people who died on our roads. Last year, we had 281 people die, which was the second lowest in 100 years. And so many efforts to make that happen over the many decades. And what I want to talk about is the efforts that we're continuing to make to bring down our trauma towards zero. In New South Wales, we have 25% of the fatalities across Australia, 26% of serious injuries of those people admitted to hospital. Our fatalities, as I said, were 281 last year. Our serious injuries were 9,711. And the annual cost of road crashes to the community is $9 billion in New South Wales. In terms of the international context, out of 30 OECD countries, New South Wales has a rate last year of 3.44 compared to our overall Australian rate of 4.45 and the US rate of 12.84. And of course, we're all aspiring to the best performing countries in the world in reducing trauma. And we've been adopting many of those systems and ways of reducing trauma by adopting those international best practice. And so you get a sense of the size of New South Wales where we sit. New South Wales, in terms of population, sits between Washington State and Virginia. Our trauma, 281 compared to 745 in Washington and 1,005 in Virginia, and the rate of 9.47, 3.44 and 11.57. And so it's really important, and we're very pleased to be able to share our learnings and to work with you in reducing your trauma as well, supporting our journey as all citizens towards zero trauma on our roads. I'm just going to cover some of the challenges that we face in pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. So you can see here that out of our total fatalities, our pedestrian fatalities as a proportion have come down, particularly this year, in spite of a significant increase of 80 more fatalities this year. Our vulnerable road users cohort has not actually increased. And so what we're attempting to do is to continue our journey from 2016 when we had 71 pedestrian deaths, this year 47. So to continue that journey of attempting to eliminate pedestrian fatalities on our network. And one of the interesting issues for us is that by urbanisation, actually we've seen a significant sort of continued increase in our regional towns and villages across the state compared to our metropolitan areas. And so that presents a different challenge, and we're now taking a lot of the learnings from what we've been doing in our cities and rolling them out in our regional towns and cities across the state. And also you can see here the vulnerability of older pedestrians, and so you have a significant number of people over 70 years of age who are actually dying on our roads. And so really important that we focus as well on making it safe, no matter how old you are, whether you're a child or a senior, to be able to move around your local community. And so the types of locations these crashes are happening, 50% of them are happening at intersections, and 50% of them are happening mid-block and on roadways. Of the intersections, 65 are at non-signalised intersections, and 35% are at signalised intersections. It gives us a good indication of where to focus our efforts as well. And in terms of the speed zones of these fatal crashes are happening, a significant number of them in the 50 and then 60 kilometre an hour zones. Our 50 kilometre, I think, is your 30 miles. And then we have our serious injuries. And so we've come from 2016 of more than 1,000 serious injuries. That's people admitted to hospital with injuries from a pedestrian crash, down to 893. And this is a really important area because of the significant amount of trauma that it contributes to the community as well. And you can see from the serious injuries as well, those 50 kilometre an hour zones and 60s, 2,866 people admitted to hospital from crashes in 50 kilometre an hour zones. And so the really important speeding and speed zones are to reducing trauma for pedestrians. I want to talk about our strategic framework for the long-term elimination of trauma in New South Wales for pedestrians in particular. And so New South Wales have moved as part of our transport planning framework and planning framework overall for communities to a movement and place framework. And this is to consider main roads and main streets, but local streets and also civic places, and to have a vision for how those places operate so that where we have significant active transport, pedestrian and cycle movements, that are designing those locations so that they get the outcomes that people would expect, vibrant communities which are safe for people to move around in. And part of that change has been turning on its head how we actually do the establishment of a primary road function. We're now, as part of that movement and place framework, now have a road user space allocation process, which says we should first consider pedestrians, people with disabilities, micromobility and bicycle riding, public transport, freight movements to service the community, connected vehicles, and then last, consider vehicles. And this is a fundamental change to the way in which we are considering the allocation of road space, but also the design of our communities and how they move around. So we've already started applying those movement and place policies in New South Wales and transforming what were primarily movement corridors where people actually were wanting to see more movement for people, and transforming them in terms of the design of those locations. And a critical element of that is actually the establishment of 30 kilometre placemaking speed zones. And there's an example in our far south coast, but also one in Manly here in Sydney on our beaches. And all of this is about having a safe systems application for pedestrian safety, so that we're considering safer roads, the speeds, the safer vehicles and safer people. Because we know that when there's a crash involving a vehicle and a pedestrian in a 30 kilometre zone, there's 90% likelihood of surviving a crash. When we go to 40 kilometres, that drops to 60% likely to survive a crash. and 50 kilometres only 10%. And so you can see the importance when we have so much of our trauma in those 50 and 60 kilometre zones for pedestrians of transforming those locations and creating these lower speed environments. As part of that, we're also integrating the safe systems approach in all of our systems in order to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes across the whole of the system. And that includes integrating that into our placemaking, as well as our survivability thresholds, into our speed zoning standard, which we've updated just in this last year. Because speed is the single biggest factor in fatal crashes in New South Wales, with 40% of our fatal crashes speeding being the most significant contributing factor. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the examples of what's working as well and what we've learned. So our red light speed camera program, more than 200 locations across the state, and increasingly we're rolling these out into those regional towns as well, because we see them as a very effective means for reduction of trauma. And you can see here that the program has reduced pedestrian casualties by 66%. And all fatalities by 79%. So a really effective measure in terms of reducing trauma on our roads. Another program, which is the changing of our phasing of our intersections in terms of the signalised intersections, which is hold the red for vehicles whilst giving a green light for pedestrians to cross, to remove the conflict for pedestrians. And what we've seen is fatal and serious injury crashes with pedestrians reduced by 43 to 47%, and all pedestrians involved in crashes down between 20 to 38%, which is a fantastic result. And our high pedestrian activity areas, which are designed in a way which enables safer movement of people in those areas and manage traffic calming and other infrastructure that actually supports pedestrian safety in those locations. And that program, which has been going for more than 20 years now, and we did an evaluation of it and reduced all crashes by 40%, but in particular pedestrian casualty crashes by 49% and fatal pedestrian crashes by 100%. An outstanding outcome, and we're accelerating the development and uptake of these high pedestrian activity areas as well across New South Wales. And of course, pedestrian campaigns. And it's really important to be engaging with the community, creating an environment where people are able to take safer choices. And our campaigns have been focused both on pedestrians but also on drivers and putting in situ decals like the look out before you step out in high risk locations to support people in making the right decision in order to protect them. And so really pleased to have been able to present some of our context and our challenges and some of the things that we've done which have actually reduced pedestrian trauma in New South Wales. Always happy to work with people from anywhere around the world in sharing our ideas and our successes and our challenges. I'm happy for people to access all of our information online at our websites. And thank you for allowing me to be part of your conference and to contribute to our journey together towards zero.